Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Very warm welcome, and thank you for joining us today for this panel session on navigating innovation and ethics with a focus on implementing responsible AI in digital payments to accelerate the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm Shruti Sharma, Program Officer at the United Nations Better Than Cash Alliance, and I'll be moderating this session. Our discussion will unfold in two parts. First, we will explore how responsible AI in digital payments has a transformative potential by potential through improving efficiency, security, and user convenience. So we'll look into several of the use cases, just to name a few, such as peer-to-peer lending platforms, digital wallets, chatbots, robotic advisors, and in this section, we'll also try to see how this is also linked to and contributing to the advancement of the SDGs across sectors like health, agriculture, SME, finance, and others. And I believe all of us here in the audience understand why these applications often operate behind the scenes. They have been playing a crucial role in enhancing the reliability and functionality of financial systems and thus fostering greater financial inclusion for underserved communities. And in the second part of the discussion, we'll focus on the bigger and more important question and on how to leverage an AI responsibly. So we will deliberate on critical challenges and risks associated with the AI integration, such as potential algorithmic biases, unethical data practices, data security and privacy concerns, and more. And many of the global guidance principles, such as the UN Responsible Principles for Digital Payments, UNESCO's Ethical AI Guidelines, United Nations Secretary General's Tech Envoy's guidance on responsible AI, highlights the importance of transparency, accountability, and inclusivity. So we'll be today hearing from our panelists, learning from their work on responsible AI. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists. So we are delighted to have with us Ms. Gloria Guerrero. She's the Executive Director at ILDA, which is Latin American Initiative for Open Data based in Mexico. We are pleased to have with us Mr. Nana Kofi Aidu. He's the Executive Director at the Ghana Domain Name Registry at the Ministry of Communications and Digitalization, Government of Ghana. And last not the least, we are pleased to have Mr. Harsha Bhaumik, Director of Digital Economy and FinTech at the Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. A huge thanks to all of our panelists for taking the time to share insights from your respective experiences. So, starting with the first part of the discussions, which we'll be starting by focusing on use cases of AI in digital payments and how they are linked to and are contributing to several of the sustainable development goals. I would like to start with you, Nana. With AI technologies projected to contribute up to 1.2 trillion USD to Africa's economy by 2030, and many of the African countries, including Ghana, now having their national AI strategy in place, we would like to hear your perspective, either from the region or specifically Ghana. How do you see Gen AI transforming the digital payments landscape? And if you can share some specific examples of how this is also contributing to SDGs, such as through enhancing health payment digitization or expanding credit access to MSMEs and more. So over to you, Nana, please.
Okay, Shruti, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Yeah.
And greetings to Harsha and Gloria, and also to the audience. So thank you very much, Shruti. Well, the Ghana AI strategy is in the works. A document has been published, and is going through several processes before it actually becomes fully implemented. However, the ideas in there are in the right direction. It is designed to create an environment within the country where a powerful technology like AI can be made accessible to all people in a safe way. And with the speed of development of AI these days, I think that a document like this is much needed and much needed quickly. But if you look at the Ghana economy and the way things are done, AI definitely will improve almost everything in the country. We right now have 70% internet penetration within the country. But the problem might be that even though the internet reaches into beyond the urban areas, into rural areas, there are people that don't have maybe they don't have the devices or the know-how, or maybe sometimes you can have electricity problems where they can actually get access to services that may be available. But definitely, these are going to be improved over time, and it's going to get to a point where a lot of SDGs, in fact, even as we speak, the use of digital payments, technology, mobile money transfer, and now with AI is definitely going to improve the situation when it comes to different SDGs. For example, one of the SDGs talks about no poverty. Definitely, financial payments can go a long way to reduce poverty by coming up with innovative ways in which credit can be made accessible to people who, without this technology, they would have to travel a long distance before they can get into a bank and then get the whole process done. So definitely, things like alternative credit scoring methods can facilitate microfinancing opportunity for people who are not necessarily in the urban areas, who may be engaged in small scale farming or small scale businesses and such like. Definitely, SDG 10, which talks about reduced inequality, definitely can be affected by the same similar things I talked about in terms of money transfer. And then, as we all know, one of the most powerful effects of AI is ability to detect anomalies, and hence that technology can then be leveraged into fraud detection, which obviously once fraud is detected, it leads to protection of the citizenry. And that definitely ties in directly with SDG 16, which talks about peace, justice, and strong institutions. And of course, when government also wants to remit do certain social remittances or send money to certain people who may be needed, it can easily be done using the same technology in an optimized and safer way. And I think, as for the SDGs, if we were to go outside payments, there are so many other things that it can affect. But I'll talk about one last one, which is health. Sometimes you go to the hospital and you need to have payments done in a very quick way. You might not have the cash on you, but with safer payments through AI and existing technologies, I think that SDG 3, which is better health, can also be better served. So I think I'll hold on there and see what my other panelists can want to contribute on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nana, for bringing in those extremely important points. And as you rightly said, AI's potential is not just in digital payment sector, but in every sector indeed. And also, thanks for highlighting many of the important SDGs and clearly providing how internet penetration and mobile payments can play a critical role in creating pathways to financial inclusion, and SDGs such as reducing poverty, SME finance, reduced inequality, and also like how it will impact by making it a safer payment platform accessible to everyone. And it's also very inspiring to see how national strategies can and are driving real impact on ground. Now, moving on to Harsha, I would like with India's fintech landscape seeing a remarkable growth and also with UPI transactions increasing from 8 billion last year in January to 13.9 this year by June, which is uh, quite inspiring. So, could you share what innovative AI use cases India is exploring to boost efficiency, speed, and accuracy in digital financial services? And also, if you could share your perspective, how do you envision these advancements shaping the future of financial inclusivity and digital public infrastructure? Over to you, Harsha.
Sure. Thank you, Shruti. First of all, very good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. And my greetings to my fellow panelists, Nana and Gloria. And thanks for having me in this conversation. I think it's a very comprehensive and widespread out conversation on AI. Whenever we start speaking on AI, the span is so huge that we struggle to find out on which scope we will actually speak on. So considering that AI is such a evolving, emerging technologies in terms of different kind of models which are coming up every now and then, in terms of the supervised learning or unsupervised learning, in terms of the reinforcement learning or hybrid models of deep learning, LLMs, large language models, Gen AI. So the applications are pervasive and across the domain of fintech and financial services for sure. Now, because for the constraint of time and because I normally is working in the government sector, so I will just try to focus few things which obviously we are focusing from the government perspective, from the policy perspective, some of the few things on the applications of the AI. And obviously there are multiple private use cases which fintechs are using. I think our fellow panelist Nana has already mentioned few of them. And there are across the value chain of payments and digital financial services for any sector you pick up, be it lending, be it credit, be it on the investment, there is application of AI everywhere. So considering this whole broad landscape, I think I'll just try to highlight the few of the things which AI is really making a mark and really is like almost it's getting right business as usual to use AI in those kind of use cases. So the first and foremost, I think there are two aspects to slice and dice this whole landscape. One is how is AI increasing the productivity. When I say productivity, is basically how it is increasing the consumer experience, how it is actually increasing the total factor productivity, and how it is making life easier for many underprivileged section of the people where government feel means it's actually a very hard for the any of the public sector as well as the private sector to reach. So AI is helping on that aspect a lot in various use cases. And the next is mostly on the supply side on the consumer protection side, because AI is being used a lot in terms of how to protect the consumers and how to preemptive the cyber attacks or preemptive various other fraud which is currently happening around the globe. And being it's an emerging technology, geographical barriers is not a constraint for any kind of fraud to happen. So it's a difficult situation for any kind of policymakers to actually handle this kind of a fraud where its scope and the span is across the globe. So saying that, I think I miss like for the some of the few things which we are working on, right? To give you an example, one of the basic aspects I think most of the developing economies and like us also struggle is how we can onboard the customers very efficiently, easily, and actually reach out to the last mile, which doesn't have the requisite documentation for getting onboarded in a financial system. Now, when such is a scenario, AI comes into a very handy tool in which not only we are actually kind of automate the whole KYC process or know your customer process, in which we don't even have to go to the visit the place which is at a very remote location to complete the KYC. We can use a face authentication, which again use a deep learning face recognition AI algorithm to actually check the identity of the person, whether he or she is alive, whether he or she is actually the right person with whom the documents which he or she is submitting. Based on that, we also can do a risk check on the KYC identification. So based on that, we are trying to do a kind of a whole completely digital KYC process to implement in as part of our government initiative, where we are using AI extensively. So saying that, another one I think you have talked about financial inclusion, which has normally we talk of three dimensions of financial inclusion. One is access, one is usage, and one is quality of financial inclusion. And I think AI has implications in all of these three stages of financial inclusion. So for access, I guess any kind of a personalization which the AI offers for any kind of a financial product, be it the payments, be it the credit or anything, plays a huge role. Now, nowadays for the underprivileged section of the people, when they're using a digital product for their less awareness or less digital literacy, it's very difficult for them to use that product. So first of all, using AI, we can actually personalize the product for them so that at least they have the minimum kind of a resistance to use that product. Not only for training them, first of all, through AI, but also through kind of a customized product in which they, like based on the pattern of behavior of how they actually use their fund, they can actually create some kind of a automated savings tool or savings instrument through which the funds will be automatically allocated, and there will be much more usage of those funds which they actually struggle when they, and that's why I think that's a very important aspect of financial inclusion in which we can increase the usage through personalization. So saying that, another thing is obviously access to credit. Now, access to credit for the normal people who have a relationship with the traditional banks is very easy because they have the credit history, they have taken loan. But for the youths, for marginal group of people who are at the various remote locations or doesn't have the access to this kind of a financial ecosystem, they don't have the data for to get the credit which they require. And also the professions is mostly informal, and the informal system, they don't interact with the formal financial system. So saying that, because nowadays digital is all pervasive, so they will obviously have some digital footprint. Be it like in UPI, at least for India, we have almost like saturated 50% of our population with digital payments. Now, any tea seller or any kind of a vegetable seller in India is using to accept digital payments through UPI, maybe 50 cents or $1. Such a micro payments is also getting accepted through digital payments. So when we have such kind of a digital footprint, AI actually help us to kind of do an alternate database credit scoring and make them actually assess them for eligible for credit. So this is a huge kind of impetus for our policymakers to actually reach out to this last mile and push credit to whoever is the needy one, which were actually left over for the traditional systems previously. Now, saying that, there is also another very important thing which is also very essential, which AI is playing a very important role. Because whenever there is a relationship between borrower and the lender is always very suspicious or very concerned about his NPAs or non-performing assets, or whether they will get the money back or the collections, right? Now, AI is playing a huge role in terms of creating an early warning system. So EWS, or early warning system, for any kind of a loan which has already been issued or granted, is a very important aspect, because it gives some kind of a comfort to the lender through which they can monitor the loan. And if suppose based on the data which I think the borrower will be sharing with consent, the lender can actually judge what is the financial position of the borrower and do some kind of a flagging based on which preemptive action can be taken before it goes delinquent. So EWS system is also some kind of a AI-based tool which is having a lot of impact. Shruti, I will do a kindly time check. If you have, give me 1 more minute, I can go on, or if you say, I can then again start back again.
You can quickly just conclude it, and then. Yeah.
So last but not the least, I will just take 2 or 3 few more examples in terms of like we have a concept of digital public infrastructure in India, right? And we have created an AI-based Bhashini platform called Bhashini, which is nothing but is like this language translator into a vernacular language, which you can plug and play with any of the products which you use in the financial services, which have immense use, because most in India we have more than 50 languages, and if this actually helps the end user to actually view the financial services product in their own languages. So based on that, I think, and UPI also has, I will go into more of these use cases maybe later on if you have time. Like you can use NLP for voice-based payment systems, which UPI has already implemented, and there can be many other Gen AI-based UPI systems which is already currently there. But last, I will touch on the very important aspect of fraud, in which AI is really very important. I think it has been going on for last few 4, 5, 10 years now, but it is evolving, and the models are getting much more sophisticated, in which we are using artificial neural network for to kind of do a very high risk customer categorization, identifying the anomalies in the transactions so that we can highlight the suspicion transactions. And we are also actually using it for mule account and transaction monitoring, but I will maybe detail it out later if I get some more time. So I think that is the overall landscape, and AI, I guess, to wrap it up, is a very essential tool for financial inclusion on all the 3 dimensions which I mentioned. Thank you, Shruti.
Yeah, thanks so much, Harsha, for bringing in all very important points from policymakers' perspective, and especially highlighting how, like in every um, part of the financial inclusion stage that you mentioned, access, usage, and quality of financial services, how AI is playing an important role. And I would particularly want to highlight the point that you mentioned around reaching remote areas and enhancing the user experience, and also like a very critical area around how India is leveraging alternative data and face recognition and all these advanced technologies to onboard customers easily, and specifically who did not have a credit history earlier. So that's fantastic to see how you are leveraging across so many use cases. I would now like to move to Gloria. From your experience, could you also share us with some specific areas where AI is being leveraged in digital payments or broader financial services within the LAC region? And I would also like to ask you, how is some of your work or the initiatives that you have seen in the region are reshaping access and equality in financial services, especially for underserved communities like women? Over to you, Gloria, please.
Thanks, Shruti, and thanks for the invitation to join this amazing group. It's very nice to join Harsha and Nana in this discussion, and thanks to the alliance for considering also Ilda in this space. As all my colleagues previously mentioned, we know that artificial intelligence has the power to accelerate solutions and to tackle like global challenges and structural inequalities. But also, I think its potential to create positive human change will impact the way on how we understand responsible, inclusive, and purposeful approach. I think this is super important, especially if we want to create value for all in a region that it's very, very unequal, like Latin America and the Caribbean. The banking systems has always been at the forefront of innovation and data sharing systems. And I think this is key for AI adoption, and also it's key for the discussion in terms of how we're gonna kind of take advantage of the timing to really reach the SDGs commitments, and for example, as Nana mentioned, to reduce poverty or to guarantee the inclusion of underserved communities. Um, we are seeing in the region a trend in adoption of AI technologies, especially in the fiscal and the macroeconomic policymaking strategies. And some of the countries that are witnessing some of these changes and are kind of moving faster towards this change are Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Argentina at some point, and also Mexico. And as we all know that and if we use some of the data that was published recently by the Inter-American Development Bank, we know that AI, and especially this sector, has the potential to increase our GDP regionally by over 5.4% in average by 2030. And I think it is a significant opportunity to optimize resource allocation. And as I mentioned, some of these governments are using AI to map specific needs or to reach communities that are not on cities, but more on rural areas. But I think also it's important in terms of how, and we don't have yet like a regional strategy in terms of data protection, and also how data is going to be managed in the future in this area. I think the potential is huge. And it's also very, very important to guarantee a big investment in developing more digital skills to all communities understand the value of the data, the possibilities in terms of banking inclusion, financial access, and also to invest in infrastructure, because as also some of my colleagues previously mentioned, there is also a big connectivity gap in the region that we also need to address. And also there is the need to allocate data centers, and also that can kind of fit into the need of having regional infrastructure to really harness and to really kind of grasp the potential of these new technologies to guarantee financial inclusion, but also to reach higher levels of development. So, and I think I will also use the second space to mention in terms of women inclusion. I think there's also a big gap in terms of understanding what responsible AI means with a gender lens. Uh, we have seen globally this is still a discussion like being kind of in process, and there are very good examples of some small organizations that are allocating or are using pilots to address this gap in terms of the gender approach. And I think that also those specific examples and small projects need more investment and also need more support to really iterate not just the pilot, to iterate those pilots to reach bigger audiences and to really benefit more women all over the region.
Thank you so much, Gloria, for all these very important insights. And thank you also for putting the focus on data management and digital gender gap. That provides me the perfect segue to move to the second part of the discussion. So, where, as I mentioned earlier, that we would be focusing more on the risks associated with the implementation of AI. So, I would like to start with Nana, with the Ghana National AI Strategy identifying many critical areas such as the algorithmic biases and data related concerns. So, could you elaborate more on these specific areas? And also, like, if you could highlight some of the concrete measures or strategy that are being discussed presently to address these challenges, and how do you see stakeholders to collaborate to ensure that AI technologies are implemented fairly? Over to you, Nana, please.
Thank you. I was on mute there. Yes, I think that we all know that AI is very powerful, but as someone once said, with great power comes great responsibility, and there are so many things that need to be looked at. Case in point, I could start with the what I could call the opaqueness of the algorithms, right? As far as I know, there are a lot of AI companies out there on the internet, but it's only Meta AI, which is open source. Okay. So what that means is that nobody knows how the algorithm is actually doing its work. Nobody can see into the algorithm, and nobody exactly knows what data is used to train the algorithm. So if the algorithm is built in Palo Alto, put on the internet, and is accessed in Bangalore, it might be trained on norms, ideas, and philosophies that may not necessarily tie with what is the norm in Bangalore, right? So that definitely creates a situation where, um, algorithm bias is already implicit. Now, if there was some transparency, as Meta has is open source, or there are some countries right now like China and Holland that have started having what we call algorithm registries. And so what that means is that if there's an algorithm that says it can recommend that this person get a loan or that person get a loan, right? The government has a case to say, hey, let us see how your algorithm does this work. Because as we all know, AI is powerful, but it can hallucinate sometimes. This is a huge risk. So if you have an AI recommending that this farmer or this small scale businessman get a loan or not get a loan, right? and is based on hallucination, and nobody has a way of looking into it, then that's a huge risk. That's a huge problem. So that brings me to the measures that are being discussed in Ghana to obviate such situations. One of them being, the right guidelines, discussions on how to get the algorithms to be transparent, and also when a recommendation is made or when a decision or a proposal is made by an algorithm, there should be, quote unquote, what I call maybe a disclaimer that says, okay, this decision was reached based on this algorithm and reviewed by this other gentleman, right? So that there is some kind of regulation going on, even though the algorithm might not necessarily be produced by the users. Other things that we also have to bear in mind is that in order to prevent some of these risks, we have to ensure that we don't put the human mind aside completely. Gary Kasparov was one of the best chess players out there. He was the first chess player who played against the machine and was beaten by a machine, DeepMind. He said that the human being and the machine must work together. We cannot just leave it. So some of these ethical frameworks and standards and guidelines should include some of these ideas. And these are some of the discussions that are going into the national AI strategy and framework to prevent issues like algorithm bias and things that we don't have control over. The last thing I want to talk there are two things I want to talk about. You know that AI also has the capability of doing things like deep fakes, right? So right now is in the process is in the infancy, right? It will get to a time where they can do 100% perfect deep fake. Okay. Now, Harsha talked earlier about doing KYC with digital or facial authentication. So what then happens if I use a powerful AI to generate a deep fake and then use it to be the facial authentication of someone else's account, right? These are things that are very, very serious that need to be looked at deeply and are being considered on our side here. And obviously, the power of AI now is such that RSA and other well-known algorithms for cryptography, right, can easily be broken by AI because they were built at a time when there was nothing like a machine sitting down doing 1 billion calculations in a 1 trillion token screen and destroying the cryptographic measures that have been put in place. So this means that as the hackers are moving fast, the defenders must be moving fast. And these are things that risks that are out there that we need to be considering seriously in this new horizon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nana, for highlighting these very critical risks. And as you rightly said, that at the end of the day, it is technology, and we need to be a step ahead. And specifically around the deepfake example that you mentioned in regard to the facial recognition, that's a really interesting question to deliberate on and see how we can have ethical frameworks and guidelines in place on to see how to ensure that the implementation is responsible and fair. So thank you so much. Harsha, I would now like to ask you, drawing some areas from Ghana's experience with AI-related risk, what strategy is the Indian government adopting to mitigate some of these challenges and issues while at the same time promoting the widespread adoption of AI in financial sector?
Thanks, Shruti. And I think it's a very important question. And I think every country and worldwide, we in every global forum, we are actually trying to answer these questions or trying to deliberate on these questions, because this is as important as that kind of a paradox in which how much to regulate or how to regulate and what part to regulate, because we sometimes we also have to think of that how much we don't have to constrict the innovation, because these are emerging technologies. So this balance between how much to regulate and not to constrict innovations, as well as regulate it for consumer protection, that's a very thin line, and every regulator is thinking on those lines. So saying that, I think some of the risk which Nana has already mentioned, I will not go deep into those, but I will mention some additional risk which we also are facing, right? So he has also already mentioned about how black box algorithm is kind of a risk in which it erodes trust in the system, because when you're using such kind of algorithm which we don't know what is inside and what logic is behind it, so it removes the trust from the system, and it is not actually very good for the financial inclusion or for the people who are very not digitally savvy and using the system for the first time. Trust is a very important factor for anyone using financial services, and this kind of risk is actually not very good for that kind of a scenario. So saying that, I think, and it was well identified that when we are using AI for kind of a biometric authentication, or for kind of using face authentication for doing KYC, there are chances of deep fake. In fact, I can cite an example in India where it was, we have a payment system called Aadhaar based payment system, in which you authenticate the payment through your fingerprint. Now there was kind of a fraud in which liquid fingerprint was being used. So this liquid fingerprint anyway was used to authenticate fraudulent transaction on this, based on this identity. Now AI has both sides of the coin, that as AI was used to defraud the payment system, but again the same AI is actually being used now to identify if this fingerprint is liquid fingerprint or not. So in both ways, I think the things are there. So it's just that we have to compartmentalize AI in the best ethical ways and best ethical manner through this kind of a well thought out policy, which will actually be the future. So saying that, some of the other risks which are absolutely very important to mention, I think one of the risks which are there, because AI, considering it is an emerging technology, it can also turn out to be a very great systemic risk for the financial services. When I say systemic risk, because concentration risk or systemic risk is already a challenge for any kind of a big techs in any part of the world, right? So if AI is also evolving in this way, so many of it can be concentrated to only a few technology companies, which can be a systemic risk for the financial services. That is number one. Second thing is, like, when you are trying to do some kind of a audit on any system, because of this opacity of the algorithm is very difficult. So we need to have avenues in which we can do the audit of this kind of an algorithm, through which the financial, for at least for the financial services, this kind of a machine unlearning algorithms needs to be reproduced or needs to be carved out. So that is one type of things or mitigation effort which we need to also think about. Then another risk is there basically on contagion risk, because AI is being used extensively, and there is a huge chance that because of AI, misinformation also spreads in a very faster space. And it has a direct implication on the financial services based on bank run or different kind of other aspects. As more digitalization happening and more fungibility is happening because of tokenization, there is always a risk of different kind of contagion risk because of misinformation, and because of the misinformation, there is a direct impact to the financial stability and macroeconomic stability of the country. So we are looking closely into this risk, and obviously there is also a risk we call a stress testing, in terms of we are using AI models for various financial models, various financial products, but we have to test those models based on any kind of a market mishap or market shock or any kind of a geopolitical shock. So AI models, whether they are stress tested for this kind of a shocks, we have to be sure of that. Then only we can actually use them for our financial services. Saying that, I think the last everyone speaks about it, and it is also very pertinent, is like the biases, algorithm biases, right? Because when you are doing, we have spoken about how it is doing credit assessment on alternate data, but if there is an algorithmic biases, I think it was highlighted that there was an algorithmic bias with some of the underwriting tools actually not underwriting appropriately for the minorities. So this kind of algorithm biases may be present. So we have to be very guarded on these kind of algorithm biases, which should not be suitable for any kind of a financial ecosystem. So saying that, I think in India, we have multiple projects. Obviously, Europe and UK has come up with their own AI guidelines and policies. in India we are deliberating whether we need to have those kind of a policy, or existing policy is already covers some part of it. In the existing policy, you know that in last year we have come up with the DPDP Act, it's the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, and the rules will be coming out soon, which actually gives the liberty for the users to actually have a access of their own personal data based on their consent, and also gives the freedom and the right to the user for access, usage, and deletion of the data if any, if they have provided to some fiduciary or financial service provider. So DPDP Act is a very important regulation in that aspect, which will actually do some kind of a risk mitigation for some of the AI things, because AI needs a lot of data in terms of usage and in terms of training the models, and the data policy is very important. Second thing is like we have also have a policy of non-personal data policy, in which like how to use anonymized data. And so we also have a policy for that from a government side, and it is also very important. But here I want to actually mention another risk with this anonymized data, because whenever you are producing aggregate data for a company, means the company may use this anonymized data or aggregate data, but for AI modeling or AI tool or AI, for any kind of an AI application. But the same AI can actually be implied on this anonymous data or aggregated data to de-anonymize it or de-aggregate it for to recover the personal information. So then how should we safeguard that? So that also is a thought process for us to think about, that how, what kind of regulation could actually safeguard us from this kind of consumer harm which AI can bring into the financial ecosystem. Saying that, I just mentioned few of this, like in terms of our different missions. I think last year or last year, maybe this year, I think it was announced, our Ministry of Electronics and Telecommunication has announced AI mission, which has a budget of around $1.3 billion. This had multiple pillars to it. One is mostly on AI compute capacity building, to bring in, like with certain GPUs, 10,000 GPUs across the country. Also to build indigenous AI models, and also to have some capacity building in terms of AI education and awareness for the different kind of customer segment, as well as for the research institute, and also for like AI R&Ds for different kind of research institute for solving different kind of public policy problems. Saying that, there is also initiative from our ministries in terms of AI projects, or which we call and I think those are all being discussed right now in terms of mitigate those risks. So those projects will include like an hackathon or kind of a brainstorming or solution-driven approach to come up with a machine learning technique, synthetic data generation, in terms of how to explainable AI, for again framework for privacy enhancing strategy, how to mitigate the biases, like how to do the governance of AI models I have just mentioned, on anonymizing and de-anonymizing, and doing a stress testing, right? And at last but not the least, in terms of how we can do a audit for AI algorithms. So if we kind of have an AI solution for those kind of things. So overall, this is how we are approaching the AI, this new domain, and contemplating of how to come up with the best kind of a solutions or the regulatory approach, in which both the sides are actually given significance in terms of regulation and consumer protection, as well as innovations, which anyway the technology or the market should take it up. Thank you, Shruti.
Thanks so much, Harsha, for highlighting these very critical areas associated with responsible AI. So, and especially as you mentioned, that balancing innovation with ethical consideration is always a challenge, and especially in regard to AI, many governments are grappling with it today. And some of the interesting things that you mentioned around black box algorithm, and how the government of India is also looking at on the machine or unlearning systems, like for audits and explainable AI stress testing. Like this gives us a lot of areas to think of and look at, like how various governments are approaching it. Thank you for all these very helpful insights. I would now like to ask Gloria, from your work, what specific risks do you perceive associated with AI, and especially in regard, since you have been working on open data with the local and national governments as well? And also would like to ask, like, what policies and collaborative international dialogues do you believe could help in fostering a fair and inclusive approach to AI? Over to you, Gloria.
Hi, thanks, Judy. I think it's super important to go back to a tool that we participated in. And before that, I will say that it's important also to put on the table that the global conversation around AI governance is not always a responsible AI conversation. And as we can see at the Global Index on Responsible AI, an instrument designed to provide reliable and comparative assessments of responsible AI practices in countries worldwide, in which ILDA participated as the research hub for Latin America, there's still a major gap worldwide, specifically in areas related to protecting human rights of underserved and marginalized communities. And this is very important in terms of thinking how we can address that in Latin America and the Caribbean. And we need to pay attention before implementing these great technologies, but also to use these technologies for good. But also, I think it's important to have more mechanisms in place to protect human rights from risk, but also, and those mechanisms should look like, for example, impact assessments to measure real and potential harm, or also methodologies and processes to redress and remedy where harm occurs because of these new technologies. And I think the area in terms of transparency and access and models of public procurement guidelines to address this adoption of AI technologies in the public sector is also very important. There's a huge amount of experience in terms of open data, open government, accessing all this information, for example, for public procurement and contracts. And I think we can use all that experience also to bring that knowledge community to this conversation. As also they mentioned, in terms of, for example, algorithmic transparency, it will be super relevant to understand what governments are buying, who are they buying those technologies from. And I think that's where public procurement, open data, and access to information becomes crucial. Another important issue that we see at the Global Index on Responsible AI is that, as I mentioned before, gender equality remains a critical gap in the efforts to advance this technology worldwide. And most countries have not yet made significant efforts to promote this approach. And just to have like the quantitative data, like gender equality is one of the lowest performing thematic areas in the whole index in the 138 countries that were measured. And only around 24 countries assessed that governments had frameworks or some kind of protocols for the intersection of gender and data. And when we talk about financial inclusion or access to economic resources or support for example, small enterprises for women, I think this is super, super relevant. Also, in the region, there are different spaces where AI governance is being discussed. For example, the EU, Latin America, and the Caribbean Digital Alliance that has been promoted since last year. Also, the high-level dialogues promoted by UNESCO and CAF, and others also in the space of the HEALC network at the Organization of American States, where they are proposing all inter-American model for AI and data governance. And I think those spaces are crucial. We need to keep pushing for having more representation of the civil society, of diverse communities. And I think this conversation needs also to be open up to all sectors. We need to increase awareness, we need to increase participation, but also we need to increase understanding of how citizens are going to approach AI in all aspects of their lives. Because this technology, as it was mentioned before, it will be super useful, for example, to improve banking services, to guarantee access, to increase also a resources allocation, or to increase the possibility of having better data in bank systems. But also these technologies are going to impact all aspects of our lives, and they are already doing so. So I think it's important to understand the role of data, privacy in a multi-sector discussion. And in terms of the risk, I think it's also important to put on the table that we need to guarantee justice, equality, not just efficiency and productivity. And I think this is super important. I think this technology has amazing potential also to increase productivity, to understand and to measure new markets. But at the same time, it's if the data that is feeding this system is, it has wrongs, it is biased, it is missing representation, especially when we talk about the global south in terms of Latin America, Africa, Asia. We know that there are some gaps in the data that the government is using. I think there's a huge need for more collaboration among the private sector and the government to improve data sets that are fitting these technologies. And I think when it comes to financial inclusion, and if we want to accelerate SDGs, I think it's super important to have a collaborative approach, and also civil society needs to be sit at the table, because those are the ones and the organizations that are working on the forefront of defending human rights, of guaranteeing representation, but also to bring a specific context and needs to this conversation. So I think it has to be an open conversation, not just having the technical experts and academics, and especially maybe the technologists in our countries, but also to have true and real representation of the communities that are going to be affected or benefit by these new technologies.
Thank you so much, Gloria. These are like kind of foundational points that you raised, like very, very relevant. Thank you for your comprehensive insights into global AI governance, and especially bringing in the focus on gender equality and the right representation in the data sets that are being used for training these models and the algorithms. And also, like very importantly, as you highlighted, the need for better representation of grassroots levels, women, and other people who would be directly impacted by these technologies and the policy decisions, to have a seat at the table and better representation in policy making. So thank you so much for all these very important points. In interest of time, to conclude, I would like to invite each panelist to share, like maybe just very quickly, your final remarks in 1 minute. You can highlight which area of the AI use cases or any that you think is the most promising, or like if you would like to highlight any of the most important risks, or your country's vision or priority for 2025 in addressing the associated risks. Over to you, 1 minute, your final remarks. We can start with Nana.
Thank you, Shruti. It's been a very interesting, enlightening conversation. For me, I think I'll talk about what I see to be what is promising about AI, provided that the environment is made safe with the right guidelines and ethics. I mean, I think that these days there's a whole lot of talk about AI. It's almost as if we've forgotten that, the power of AI is being felt because it stood on the internet, and the internet stood on the hardware that was built. I mean, there are a lot of technologies before AI, and there'll be more, including, AGI, which I always wonder how it will manifest, but it will come. But I think one key technology that we seem to have forgotten about is the blockchain technology. And I actually believe that the synergy between AI and blockchain is very powerful. Luckily in Ghana, the Ghana currency is called the CD, and we have what we call the ECD. The central bank has created an ECD, even though it's not a typical blockchain currency. It's a central bank-backed digital currency. But it provides a chance for people that can create the right kind of AI algorithms, even within the country, to leverage that, to use that in smart contracts, right? And in fact, I also know that there's actually a company that allows you to use a natural language text to write a contract between two people, and then they can take that and use AI to create the smart contract on the blockchain-based currency, right? This is real accessibility. And I also know of another company that is using AI to translate local languages, similar to what Harsha mentioned before, that can give access to ECD or any kind of digital platform in terms of payment or anything, to people that are not able to speak or write English, or use their phones with the traditional ways that are being used. So I think that the applications are endless, powerful, and very promising. And I think the future is bright. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. What do you, Harsha?
Thank you, Shruti. Yep, I think it was an excellent discussion for all the valuable inputs from all the panelists. I will just be very crisp and short for my last final comments. One use case which is very close to my heart, and I want that to be implemented in a very near future. That is actually solving a real world problem right now, which we are facing on cybercrime or cyber frauds, mostly on the payments and financial services. So, typical cyber crime or cyber fraud and payments is by using a mule account. I don't know if everyone understands what is a mule account is, but typically what happens is like any gullible kind of a payer is actually defrauded through either device takeover or various other means in which money will be debited from their account and then will be split into multiple other accounts and then take it out of the country, which we call a kind of a mule account kind of a fraud which is happening. So this needs to be stopped proactively through use of AI, through kind of a fraud monitoring system. But the basic challenge is in our banking system, mostly the transaction monitoring happens only on the debit side of the transactions, which is happening on our account. But transaction monitoring doesn't actually cover the credit side of the account. And this fraud is such a way it is happening. The mule account, because it's like $100 is split into $1 into 100 accounts, so that $1 deposit getting credited into an account is not getting detected by our transaction monitoring system. So we want to have a very evolved kind of an AI model which will actually intervene and do a real-time transaction monitoring of this kind of a fraud, and we can stop this fraud and give a mitigation to this risk which we are facing across the world. So that is number one. Secondly, I think on the overall industry perspective and regulatory perspective for 2025, I think I have only 2 or 3 aspirations. The one which I have already mentioned is how best we can balance between the innovation and regulatory regime of AI, because we don't want to have a very right kind of a balance on that. Second thing is like I also will love to have some kind of indigenous AI models for our country, because most of the models which are right now there is like a pan global models in which black box models. So we would like to have some indigenous AI models which we can come up with some kind of an R&D fund to create those kind of a models. That I think this already coming up, but it would be good to have some kind of a very scalable model on that. And last but not the least, as I think Gloria has already stated, that AI depends on data. And we are actually proposing DPI in many sectors of digital public infrastructure. So we want to have some kind of a data platform for AI. We have a data exchange for financial services, but cross-sectoral data exchanges which are on the platform of DPI with a proper governance is something I will look forward for like the AI segment or the AI industry sector in the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harsha. Gloria, just sorry, 30 seconds to you. I want to take one question from Q&A. So over to you quickly. Thank you.
Okay, super quickly, just 2 points.
Yeah.
First, I think, yeah, this is a new technology that brings amazing opportunities and possibilities. And also, I truly believe that we are better equipped to create the safeguards that are needed to guarantee that this new technology will work for everyone. And secondly, I would like to mention also that we need to keep an eye on how we measure responsible and ethical AI, because we must take into account the whole cycle of the technology. I think it's not just the end result, like the risk, but also we need to understand like every step and every stage of this technology to guarantee that the ethical and responsible approach is inserted from the beginning to the end, not just at the end where something goes wrong, but to avoid getting there. So that's it from my side.
Yeah. Thank you so much. There is one question, I think, because at 8:30 sharp, like this session will end automatically. So I will not take the question, but I can read it for you. The question, I think Harsha and Nana covered in some of the points, that how can we also create user awareness, help them understand the benefits and risks of AI in digital payments to promote adoption so that they can also trust the system. I would like to request either Harsha or Nana to please reply on it after the session gets over. If we can answer one of the questions, that would be super helpful. And I think, like, because in just 30 seconds, the session will get disconnected. So I would like to thank all of you for bringing in valuable insights today, and these insights are super helpful in navigating the complex landscape of leveraging AI and managing ethical considerations. So thank you so much again, and a huge thank you to the audience for your great questions. And we'll soon be giving response to some of the questions on chat. Thank you, everyone.